Anthony here to talk to you guys today about the Old Testament. I'm going to bring you guys to the book of Numbers. See, I was reading through the Old Testament here, and there's a story in the book of Numbers that really made me think about us today and what we go through in the circumstances in life. And in this story, in the book of Numbers, chapter 13, we have God who promised all the way back into Abraham to bring the Israelites into a land flowing with milk and honey. And now we have Moses, who helped deliver the Israelites who led the Israelites out of Egypt when the Lord delivered them from the Egyptians and freed them from that slavery, that bondage. And the Lord allowed Moses to be their leader and walk them through the wilderness. And they finally get close to that land flowing with milk and honey that God promised them. So what does God tell Moses to do when they're right there? In the first two verses here in chapter 13, it says, in the book of Numbers, it says, "And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send the men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them." So the tribes of Israel the people of Israel had different tribes, and he wanted to send a leader from those tribes into the land to spy out the land, so people can come back bringing the news of the land, how amazing that land is. But then again, the human mind brings in selfishness. The human mind brings in doubt when they finally see the land. And I'm going to fast forward here to verse 27, same book, same chapter. And in verse 27, in verse 27 it says, "Then they told him and said, We went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak." There you see the descendants of Anak back in the Old Testament were descendants of giants. And it goes on to say here that he's comparing already the walls and the statures of the people and how big that place is, and the doubt starts to seep in, and the doubt starts to create the negativity that God doesn't want us to have in our lives. You see, when we see our problems from afar, sometimes when we look at our problems from a distance, we kind of see, wow, these problems are pretty big. Is God really going to take care of this? But what we don't know is that God holds that problem along with our lives, along with everybody's lives, along with everybody's thoughts, along with the entire universe in the palm of his hand. Yes, God is infinitely bigger than even what I just described there, and he's holding all of us in the palms of his hands. And I'm going to get forward in later on in this video to explain to you guys how amazing that is. And I'm just going to go back here and to talk about more about the doubt that people have, the selfishness. And I want to fast forward to verse 31 here in the book of Numbers chapter 13. And now the people really get doubtful here. It says, "But the men who had gone up with him said, We are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, The land though which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants, as I was saying before. And we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight." So basically they're comparing themselves to grasshoppers, comparing themselves to the stature of these great giants, the descendants of Anak. And that right there is doubtful already. You see, a lot of us have this, what's the word I'm looking for? They have this self-doubt, and they don't have the confidence they need in God to truly strive. You see, that they might be grasshoppers in the sight of these giants, but to God, imagine how small we are when God looks at us. But God looks at us with this love, and he looks at us not as how small we are, but he looks at us as children. When we accept him, he looks at us as sons and daughters of the Most High. He looks at us as his rightful kids, his creation, his love, like a father or a mother looks at their newborn baby, is the way God looks at us. And then here we have them even more doubtful. We have the Israelites crying out and saying, "Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt?" And that's chapter 14, verse 3 in the book of Numbers. And we have that doubt. They're saying, would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? God took us out of the Egyptians where they were getting whipped and where they wanted to leave in the first place. God took them out and freed their people. But the people aren't satisfied. Sometimes we are never satisfied. And sometimes it's so hard to get a grip on life when we have God by our side the whole time. Sometimes our selfish desires and our selfish ways tend to look past that. But here we have the faith. Here we have God who allowed these two men to go out and spy and remain in the faith that we need to look at life when our problems are a little too big for us to even imagine. This is the faith that we need to look at those problems and know that God is with us, that no matter how big the problems are, our God is bigger, our God is greater. And this is the faith that we should all strive to have. This is the inspiration behind it. This is the beauty of it all. And this is the faith of the two people, Joshua and Caleb. Caleb, I believe the name is. These names are a little rough in the Old Testament. But it goes on to talk about their faith in chapter 14, verse 7 and 8. It says, "And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, The land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, and a land which flows with milk and honey." Right there, that's that faith we need. It says here, if the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us. It doesn't say, then maybe if the Lord delights in us, then maybe he'll give us this. Maybe if we go in the land, we'll take it. No, it says he will bring us into this land and give it to us. You see, this is the land that God promised them. God is a man of his word. God is a God who takes these promises and lives by them, and he gives them to us. And it's just an amazing feeling that we have, that when God looks at us, that God is a God of his word, and God is a God who never turns his back on us. And they see that. And these two men here see that, and they live by that faith. And that's the faith we have to look at all our situations with. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land. And then it goes on to say in verse 9, "Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." So again, he heard them say, there we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak from the giants. There we saw the giants, the descendants of Anak came from the giants. And we were like grasshoppers in their own sight. And then before that, in chapter 13, verse 28, "Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there." Then it goes on to say, "Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." Doesn't matter how big our problems are. Doesn't matter how big these people were. Doesn't matter how great their walls were. Doesn't matter how big their army was. If God wanted to give the Israelites that land, God was going to give them that land, as long as he delights in us and as long as we continue to follow him. And how amazing is it that God keeps these promises, and God's giving us this word to let us know that he loves us and that he is with us, and that if he delights in us, then anything is possible with him with us. And you see, this is the Old Testament. Now I want to take you guys to the New Testament, and I'm going to fast forward all the way to the book of Romans. And this is a great verse for this part as I was talking to you guys. I'm going to go to the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 31. And in verse 31 of the book of Romans nails it right on the head. It says here, "What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own son, but delivered him up for us all, how shall he not with him also give us all things? Also freely give us all things." You see, basically, if God did not spare his own son, if God did not spare his own life when he became flesh and died for us to save us all, how much more is he willing to give us? He's going to give us more than a land. He's going to give us eternity in Him. He's going to give us this love in Him. He's going to give us a new home in Him, a new body in Him, a new everything in Him. And you see, in Christ there's a new beginning. There's a beginning beyond so clean, a beginning that we are so purified that we are considered His children. He looks at us and wants us to be His kids. That's why He did not spare His own Son, because He loves us so much and wants to be with us for all eternity. As long as we allow Him to delight in us, and as long as we delight in Him, then all things are possible through Christ who strengthens me. He who did not spare His own Son, but delivered Him up for us all, how shall He not with Him also give us all things freely? And the reason I wanted to go over this Old Testament story and relate it to the New Testament is because how many times do we look at our problems and think they are too big for God to handle, when God holds the universe along with us in it, in the palm of His hand. The difference is God looks at us, no matter how small we are, and holds us as newborn babies. As He looks at us as His children, He delights in us and He loves us. And when we follow His will, when we follow His commands, when we follow what we were created for, He rejoices. And He gives us a land flowing with milk and honey, for He is the bread of life and the eternal water of living hope and living life. And this all starts with Jesus, and this all can be found in His Word. Love you guys.